Showtime!
It's amazing how different the Beetlejuice animated series was from the live-action source material.
Nice model!
Yet it not only became a major hit, but also, for some, an improvement over expanding certain aspects of the original, which is quite rare. In the late summer of '89, ABC premiered an animated spin-off series loosely based on the commercial success of the previous year's supernatural black comedy, Beetlejuice. The only problem was that the film was mainly centered on the adults, a quaint married couple who tragically die and must learn to navigate the land of the living and now the dead. It also featured a bunch of raunchy jokes and a self-interested sleazeball bioexorcist who, for the sake of his own freedom, coerces a 14-year-old into marriage.
A child, for God's sakes.
It was a character dynamic that didn't exactly translate well into a multi-episode Saturday morning cartoon. So to help bridge the gap, production turned to powerhouse animation studio Nelvana, the animation studio behind everything from Inspector Gadget to Care Bears and later spooky hits like Tales from the Crypt Keeper and Ruby Gloom, along with so many other childhood classics. While David Geffen and Tim Burton were the ones who ultimately decided to pivot Beetlejuice from a pure villain into a tamer anti-hero, the two main figures responsible for the show's specific tone and comedic flair were Ted Anozzi and Patsy Cameron, a husband and wife writing team from Nelvana. When first meeting with Burton to pitch ideas, they actually had to travel to London as he was in the middle of shooting Batman at the time. There, Tim was so impressed by their energy that the duo ended up making multiple trips across the pond so he could hear more. As they didn't just show him scripts, they performed for him.
And we took turns back and forth acting out all these funny skits with Beetlejuice and Lydia, and everything we said, Tim and the executives just threw their heads back and laughed. It was just like the best chemistry we had ever had.
Acting out scenes to illustrate how Beetlejuice would use literal visual puns. For example, if he told Lydia he's on a roll, he would literally be standing on a bread roll. If he was bored and wanted to watch a little TV, the television was literally the size of a beetle, something the writers leaned into as the series went on, going from occasional one-liners to an essential rule by the end.
Nobody makes a jack out of me!
And these puns wouldn't end at clever wordplay and quick gags. They would also influence episode titles, plot lines, and the logic behind the different environmental locations the characters journeyed to. This shift in atmosphere also applied to the Neitherworld, as in neither here nor there, itself. In the movie, the afterlife, or the Neitherworld, is depicted as a tragic, dreary, bureaucratic purgatory, on par with Terry Gilliam's Brazil, where the recently deceased are put on waiting lists and must complete mountains of paperwork before being seen by a caseworker, giving off the impression that being dead is just as tedious and boring as a trip to the DMV. The series went for an Alice in Wonderland spin, a macabre Neverland of sorts, transformed into a neon-soaked, Looney Tunes-esque world filled with monsters instead of corpses. Although life in the Neitherworld was still stressful and often confusing, it was more appealing to a general audience than a satirical jab at the system that only adults would relate to. Here, the threat isn't a 125-year haunt sentence, it's putting up with Beetlejuice's non-compliant antics and his constant disruption of the status quo. Not too dissimilar from his counterpart, but still the biggest change in the show is the ghost with the most himself, which was necessary for obvious reasons, specifically considering he's barely involved in the original, and the sequel for that matter. In fact, it was specifically Michael Keaton's idea to keep his screen time a consistent 17 minutes across both films. And it's a testament to Keaton's performance that for many years, audiences hardly even noticed. Despite his name being in the title, his role was secondary. A devious, perverted antagonist with anti-PC sensibilities, someone the Maitlands reluctantly hired to solve a problem, only for him to cause greater chaos. In the series, however, the writers got to flesh out his full range of emotions, his personality and his hobbies, all while stripping away the heavier themes of death.
This place is dead. Know what I mean?
And his predatory behavior from the film, leaving us with a mischievous, often selfish prankster who, on occasion, must go through lessons like the importance of honesty and being more considerate of others, primarily with the support of his best friend Lydia. And Lydia is no longer depicted as an isolated, lonely teen. She now has a small friend group at school. She's not struggling with depression or planning to cross over as it would to join the Maitlands.
I want to be dead too.
Being dead really doesn't make things any easier.
And Beetlejuice is no longer just using her. Instead, he serves as a chaotic, magical guardian, helping Lydia navigate the struggles of her world, a dynamic similar to what we would eventually see in The Fairly OddParents with Cosmo and Wanda. In turn, Lydia often gets swept up in Beetlejuice's own problems, from his various get-rich-quick schemes to his many attempts at scamming her oblivious parents for his own amusement. At home, Beetlejuice pulls several pranks on his neighbor, commonly referred to as the monster across the street, who can best be described as a mix between Gosmer and Yosemite Sam.
Oh, here's Beetlejuice bothering poor Poopsie again.
We also get tag-along characters such as Jacques, the total opposite of Beetlejuice, in that he's polite, sophisticated, and oh yeah, he has a suave French accent.
Well, bonsoir!
Despite being a skeleton, he has a passion for fitness and bodybuilding, constantly obsessing over his physique. Then there's Ginger, the tap-dancing spider. Much like Jacques, she provides a kind-hearted, optimistic contrast to Beetlejuice's unwavering cynicism. Arguably, the closest companion Beetlejuice has is his car Doomy. He's a sentient, loyal, pet-like Frankencar with magical abilities. He can shapeshift, fly, and is completely self-driving. Perhaps a nod to Nelvana's previous creation, the Gadgetmobile. However, due to an abnormal carburetor given to him by Beetlejuice, Doomy also suffers from a split personality known as Dragster of Doom, meaning sometimes he'll transform like a werewolf. Though these transformations typically only occur when he spots a dog, a reversal gag of the dog chases car trope, where he chases them until he eventually reverts to his friendly self. Apart from the main secondary cast, we're also introduced to some pretty interesting one-off or semi-recurring characters. In one of the most popular episodes in the first season, we meet Prince Vince, the prince of the Neitherworld, in a subtle reference to Tim Burton's first stop-motion short he made at Disney, Vincent, which followed the inner thoughts of a young boy pretending he was his hero, Vincent Price, who was also Tim Burton's childhood hero. Similar to that short's protagonist, Prince Vince is a gloomy, sensitive teen, often speaking in poetry. He becomes infatuated with Lydia, trying anything to impress her, even if it means getting advice from his new royal jester, Beetlejuice.
You gotta be gross. Do something that'll raise a few eyebrows.
Then, at the end of the season, after an episode featuring Lydia's extended family that gives us a fun homage to the iconic Day-O dinner party scene, we are introduced to Beetlejuice's conventional suburban-type parents. They both love their son, but wish that he lived a more traditional, ordinary life. His mother is a compulsive cleaner, obsessed with hygiene, always desperately trying and failing to get her son to clean himself up. Meanwhile, Beetlejuice's father is a typical workaholic, disapproving of his son's disordered lifestyle and constantly pushing him to get a job. Later in the series, we also meet Beetlejuice's younger brother, Donnie Juice. Donnie is the family favorite, a super polite, naive goody two-shoes, who makes Beetlejuice the clear outlier of the family. In fact, Beetlejuice is almost as terrified of his brother's overwhelming hospitality as he is of sandworms. If you recall in the movie, the sandworms were these massive, aggressive, snake-like creatures that acted as the border patrol for the desert wasteland of Saturn's moon, ultimately being used in the climax to defeat Beetlejuice. Sandworms don't appear very often in the show and have a slightly different design. They no longer feature the iconic two-staged heads and, of course, hand-drawn rather than stop-motion puppets. However, the cartoon didn't only feature traditional hand-drawn animation, as it was important to Tim that the series utilize an additional medium, considering how special effects driven its predecessor was. This led to the creation of Bury Me Not, which sounds like a name that Bart Simpson would come up with to prank Moe.
Hold on, I'll check. My crotch! Hey, has anybody seen my crotch?
Barry is an in-universe television personality who pops up in various commercials, whether he's tying into the plot of the episode or serving as a random humorous cutaway. These sequences were unique because they incorporated computer-generated animation, at a time when CGI was quite uncommon due to technological limitations, and given the sheer amount of time and money it took to successfully pull off in the late 80s and early 90s. But it did help in adding to their their weird and random, uncanny charm. This kind of experimentation is great, but in the world of television, you have to make accommodations and compromises to keep up with network deadlines. And these deadlines became a massive challenge when the series switched from its Saturday morning block on ABC to a daily schedule on Fox Kids for its fourth and final season. To accommodate this broadcasting increase, production was tasked with churning out a staggering 65 episodes within only 17 months. And unlike the 11-minute segments that were standard for the ABC era, these were 65 full 22-minute stories. Given all these factors, having large departments handling different stages for multiple episodes at a time helped create the perfect assembly line. But this also meant cutting some corners. The team relied more on reusable assets and formulaic storylines. Fortunately though, at this point the writers had a standardized Bible for the Neitherworld to keep the logic consistent. And while the first 3 seasons had their fair share of spoofs, references to Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, this later era saw a major increase in parody episodes. We saw Lydia and Beetlejuice taken through familiar stories from It's a Wonderful Life, Beauty and the Beast, Moby Dick, Robin Hood, and even The Wizard of Oz, as well as whole episodes centered on references to Shakespeare, Edgar Allan Poe, and the Brothers Grimm. However, a major change seen in the 4th season came to the opening sequence. Both versions feature reworked takes on the original Danny Elfman theme, but the first few seasons' intro had an animation style consistent with the actual show and a darker, more muted color palette. This later iteration, by comparison, was much brighter and saturated. The movements were refined and fluid, featuring warped, surreal transitions. It's overall more energetic and doesn't waste a single second. The first version used a roller coaster concept to follow Lydia and Beetlejuice through the Neitherworld. The latter, on the other hand, went for a circus theme that highlighted the many side characters, including Beetlejuice's clown rivals Scuzzo and Fuzzo, 2 obnoxious troublemakers that love to pull pranks. So as you can imagine, they're typically shown competing with the ghost with the most to see who's the better entertainer. Scuzzo and Fuzzo might have been the most iconic arch-nemeses throughout the series' run, but the final episode, Not So Peaceful Pines, had Beetlejuice confront his most challenging opponent yet, himself, or his 2 conflicting personalities, good versus evil. The finale sees a return to form, with Beetlejuice stepping back into his role as a bioexorcist. After making a deal with the mayor of Peaceful Pines to shut down a noisy party next door to Lydia, a party so loud it's literally waking the dead, things take a turn. When the corrupt mayor goes back on his promise of a cash reward, Beetlejuice bursts out into a fit of rage, splitting into 2 halves. His evil side wreaks havoc on the town, while his good side tries to keep the peace.
Let's take a moment to reflect on that, shall we?
Even though it's a fairly standard episode for the show, it was the perfect, fun, character-driven concept to leave things off on, as December 1991 marked the end of its roughly 3-year run. The production of new episodes officially wrapped, but this wasn't the end of its syndication. In fact, it was only the beginning of its growing popularity over the next decade. Fox Kids continued airing reruns as part of its afternoon lineup until '94, when it was picked up by Nickelodeon, and frequently aired on weekday mornings until '98. After this 4-year window expired, it moved to Cartoon Network, appropriate seeing as the property was owned by Warner Brothers, where it ran through the remainder of the '90s and into the first year of the 2000s. These multiple years of reruns on Nick and CN, 2 networks that were quickly becoming the dominant hubs for children's programming, helped make its afterlife arguably more successful than its original run, which is very fitting for Beetlejuice. This 10-year run across separate networks kept the brand alive, making Beetlejuice an icon of a generation. That sustained nostalgia is what paved the way for the property's massive resurgence as of late. In many ways, the cartoon's softer, less edgy take on Beetlejuice shaped the long-lasting public perception of the character. We saw this first with the hit Broadway musical, which had a wider generational appeal, reaching fans new and old, offering a version of Beetlejuice who was almost more pathetic comedic, but much like the cartoon, he was more sympathetic overall compared to the original film. The success of the musical finally pushed the idea of a sequel back into the picture after being kicked around for decades. At one point, it even had the now infamous working title, Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, but that version never moved beyond the pre-development phase and was abandoned by the late 90s. But thankfully, we eventually got a proper, less gimmicky follow-up that didn't stick with a concept that sounds like a late entry in the Friday the 13th franchise. But with all that said, which version of the Ghost with the most do you prefer? The raunchier, more blunt villain, the wacky prankster best friend, or maybe even the more meta, self-aware, and charismatic showman we saw in the musical? If you made it this far, make my millennium by dropping a like and subscribing, as we're already getting very close to the big 1K milestone. I mean, we may have already reached it by the time this video goes up, but we're only getting started, so thanks for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.